Cal, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, what's up, brother? How's it going?
Life is good. We were just talking about how I'm leaving for Disney tomorrow, bringing the family down for the first time, and be able to enjoy life on my own terms. And I'm pretty sure we're going to get into that in this conversation. But I love kind of our journey together in a sense, even though it was so separate. We really kind of traveled similar paths as far as living the corporate life. We met, and actually, you're the second guest on this show who I met while I was working for the Chamber of Commerce, and brought you in as a member and got to meet you at a couple networking events. But there was a connection, and I think we kind of saw in each other that we were thinking differently than the rest of the room. Um,
Right.
do you feel kind of similar when it comes to, like, there was just I don't even know if we talked about it. I think it was just we knew, like, right off the bat that we were different.
Yeah, for sure. I think we had met through a B2B arrangement where I was in the energy field and you were with the Chamber of Commerce. And what I appreciated was you had already kind of started experimenting on the entrepreneurial route. So your right brain, you were already there. Like, you were trying to develop this kind of like abstract form of what your heart was pushing you towards, but you were still respecting the fact that, okay, like, I'm clearly serving a purpose here, the Chamber of Commerce. Yeah, obviously it's Reading, Pennsylvania. So a lot of people look at it like, oh, it's a small little town with this kind of like great heart. But, I think your ambition seemed much more expansive. And that's kind of like my story too. So I had ended up in the energy field through a mutual friend, through a network down in Pennsylvania. I'm originally from New England, but I had kind of followed the path of pursuing and aligning with people who I knew had a bigger dream or more ambition anyway. So I didn't go into energy because that's what I went to school for, or that's what I was necessarily like in love with. I did it because I saw there was a skill set and an alignment with someone who had a bigger ambition. And I always had this huge, like kind of this bigger picture that I was trying to form as well. So when I met with you, it was like, okay, I can clearly tell this person is someone who has a lot of capacity to create. And it's just kind of like we're in this transition phase of, like, we both almost kind of subtly recognize this is not where we're going to end up, but we're just kind of like, this is cool, it's an alignment, and then we're like respecting it, but realizing we don't think we really fit in this construct of
Yeah.
how it operates. And I think a lot of people feel that way, honestly, and they don't know what to do about it.
Yeah,
So
dude, I think you're 100% right. I think there's so many people that are unhappy, with the life that they've created, and it's almost getting caught in a cycle, right? Because society says you need to do something a certain way, right? Like, I didn't go to college, so
right.
society told me that I should have felt privileged to have a job that paid a decent wage, and I got to connect with cool people, and I should have just settled there. But there was, like you mentioned, the right brain, right? Like, I'm not one to clock in and clock out. I'm not one to be strapped into show up to work, get a paycheck, do the thing. I want to enjoy my life every single day, and I feel like I was pretty close to being sucked in that life forever. Did you ever feel like you're like, I have no other choice but to stay where I'm at?
Yeah, I think sometimes the suffering comes from feeling trapped when you almost accept that you can't change your situation, which I now believe is never true. But most of the time, I can understand why it can be more challenging to change your situation for some versus others, or different scenarios, right? So there were absolutely times where I felt like this doesn't make sense at all for me. And I recognize that through the mirror of seeing the contentment or the kind of way that other people would live their life. Because some people are very content in that capacity, and, teach their own. It's not like it's right or wrong. It's just like there was no way I was feeling similar to that feeling. And it was a very like raw, like, I just hate being here. I don't like that people think this way. I just can't think this way. I feel like out of place. And when you have a lot of ambition and creativity within you, I think, or trying to channel through, it can be very it can produce more suffering, I think, because it's almost like you want to put it somewhere and you don't really know how to get that out. So you just, like, until you figure that out, until you find that kind of way to apply the purpose and build something or do whatever you got to do, you're kind of like have this anxiety almost. And I felt that a lot when I was kind of going through different things. I don't know about you.
Yeah, dude, same. And I think it's so true. And I think the awareness that you can change your life no matter where you're at is the first step in really unlocking that idea that, like, the this universe itself is unlimited to every single person, as long as you are able to unlock certain doors and do those things. And it was interesting. We knew each other at the chamber. I was let go from the chamber because the CEO didn't like me. I guess I intimidated him, was the story.
Yeah, that's
Because
how it
I'm
works.
the most intimidating guy, my 5'8" self walking through
Yeah,
the
and you scare the shit out of me.
and so, so that happens. And then obviously you go about your way, and we ended up reconnecting, and you were in such a different place. Now I was building this entrepreneurial thing on the side. And then obviously when I was let go, I already had an income. I was already building that and all those things. But you went from, I knew you as the energy guy, to all of a sudden we reconnected and you were in a completely different space. Talk a little bit about that portion of your journey, because I think that's such a big leap that people can't get their head around sometimes.
Yeah, that makes sense. So as I was kind of working through the B2B sales, and a lot of my career was based in sales, in different industries, I was kind of figuring out my entire life. It was there at least a consistent theme of skill set being built up. And it had allowed me to at least get to the point where I recognized I wanted to explore something that I was actually very passionate about, that could create an income stream that would allow me to sustain myself with or without the approval of someone in corporate, or that CEO, like you said, who just people who challenge people and have different mental thought do not do well in the system. We know this. Like, it's like there's like they're like looked at as a cancer, and it just needs to get out of here, because it's just, I can't be challenged. Just do your job and shut up. So it got to a point where I was like, okay, look, like I had fallen into wanting to reconnect with bigger boy kind of presentation of myself as I made more income growing older, where I liked luxury timepieces, and my grandfather had liked those things. And so I kind of took it upon myself to start learning an aspect of an industry based on a lifestyle choice, because I had seen how dealers were ripping people off and how people lost money as consumers, but I wanted to still enjoy this type of lifestyle and build that network off of similar passion. So I started doing some self-education and realized that I could actually start making money off alternative assets and luxuries. And as I did that and developed that skill, I connected in with our mutual friend PJ and other people who are doing it, and realize that, oh, this is actually what other people who have some high net worth and wealth do. And it kind of shifted my mindset into, let me pursue something I care about on the side, while I'm still honoring, paying the bills and doing this corporate job. And as I kind of built that skill set over time, I got to a point where I was like, okay, like clearly I enjoy doing this. Like, I spend my time doing it, even if I'm not making a shitload of money at first, but I'm getting better at it and making more income. So can I get to a point where I just transition out and leave this other place? And it wasn't because I didn't want to take advantage of double income. It was because I wasn't doing a service to the company I was with, because my heart wasn't in it. And I had given it my all and realized I just probably not a fit. So I built a game plan to exit, made more than my gross to net on the kind of side hobby at the time that it was, and quit. And then just started doing Night Watch, which was my, still is my luxury timepiece trading business, which, helped me make more money than I was in the corporate anyway, and make my own schedule. But I had bought myself a job, essentially. But what I have now retroactively understood about that is, what was so important is never the actual thing that we, I think, tend to focus on when we're making our growth and our transition. It's always that it's trying to lead us to an expansive state of something else that is bigger for what we were meant to do. And throughout all this, when I was linking in with these people who are excellent at what they did, and kind of executing in a way that allowed me to do that, I was put in a position where I could start mentoring and educating other people. And as I started to do that more, that's where this kind of like gift of taking abstract information, helping others elevate their life through these kind of things, these mechanisms, started to shine. And where I started realizing, actually, I'm a really talented teacher and I enjoy showing people this stuff. And then more and more starts coming to you, like information, right? So I think that, and I'm curious how that links up with kind of your journey too, but like, it seems like when you start pursuing certain things, even if you can't see the full picture, but you're following this calling, that you're taking these calculated risks to the point where you go, I'm just going to do it because I know if I don't, I'll kick myself in the ass if I don't try it. And I can feel that this is something that's a life that's even better than what I have. And that's enough to kind of move you through to like the bigger stages of what you're, I think, truly trying to attain, or what you're trying to move towards. And I think there's all these things our mind builds up around that to block us from that. Like, oh, well, we still got to do this, and this might happen. We might lose our benefits. We might, like, all these very convenient like borders that are just like, are you able to just kind of move through this shit to get to the bigger picture? And if you can, it just starts kind of flowing you towards it. You know what I mean? So it was an interesting transition, but I think it happened relatively fast over 5 years. And even this, for a while, I started going back into that doubt phase of like, is this too premature? Is this something that I should just be waiting for? And the signs keep coming and it just keeps pulling. And you're just like, can I get out of my own way for a second and
Yeah.
just like do something?
Dude. And I think, um, in the entrepreneurial journey, in the spiritual journey, in the growth journey that really you're talking about, right? Like we're talking about income right now. We're talking about trading one income for another, but this conversation really is a spiritual journey to become a better version of you, right? To grow into a better individual, to make an impact, to do all these things. And similar to mine, right? Like I found myself creating another job, or like I love how you said bought myself a job, right? And I did that, and then I started teaching and realizing that the teaching side of it is that impact driven side of me, right? Like not only is my message important, but so is everybody else's. So let me help them get heard more, right? And when you are living in alignment with your purpose, it's a lot easier to show up every single day. It doesn't, I hate the whole saying like do something you love and find a way to, whatever that saying is about you never work a day in your life. Because the reality is there are those stresses that still do come up in entrepreneurship, right? Like the doubt of like, who am I? And I think that's the next phase of constantly leveling up, right? Like I'm in that phase now with growing a business that in a way that I've never grown a business before. And I go, what am I doing? Right. And actually you have an episode coming out on your podcast about imposter syndrome.
Right.
And I was listening to, well, you mentioned imposter syndrome and it's based off the whole authenticity thing.
Right.
And I feel like when you feel like you have imposter, and I want you to speak to this, but I feel like when imposter syndrome comes up in your mind, it's that challenge of like, okay, are you going to step into this person you're meant to be, or are you going to continue to play small? Is that a similar thought process that you have?
Yeah, 100%. I think what I've realized is you said something in what you just said that really is, I believe, the question that everyone is here to answer. Because people are like, well, what's meaning? What's purpose? What's this? What am I here for? Like, I distract myself with shit like, oh, I need to make more money. It's cyclical. You chase something that has no end. It's like the ends to the means. But
Yep.
when you really get down to it, I believe we're all here to answer the question, who am I? And on your journey of this self-discovery, you're learning more about who you are if you choose to open up to it, or you can close off and just, not figure it out. And as you learn more about who you are, it's a journey of, I think, bravery, but also suffering, because you realize you're alone and that authenticity is actually important. And the way that the culture, or at least Western culture predominantly, has manipulated us to believe something is valuable is based on profit and based on attention. So if you don't do what everyone else does, it's like you're getting that dopamine, that reward, and
Yeah.
everyone's programmed now to go that direction instead of being like, I'm just going to do things this way. And it's just like, okay, that's like not what all these other popular people are doing, but whatever you got to do. And it may not be as popular at first, but authenticity, I think, is the true kind of path to remembering who you are. And it takes a lot of exploring and kind of experimentation sometimes. And I think the suffering is inevitable. Like I like what you said about, okay, like do what you love and then you'll never work a day in your life, which I think is an easy quip to use. But really, I think suffering is inevitable. And it's really just more about, do you give meaning to your suffering so that you suffer for a reason that is much higher than you could ever imagine? Because you can pretend to avoid it, like the people who go in and clock out like sheep, and they're like droning out, and that you can tell they're like zombies. They're like dead inside. So the
Yeah.
suffering is maybe not as intense every moment, but it's an elongated suffering for something that they don't know what they're pursuing. Versus if you have high intent of what you believe you're trying to go after or find who you are, like your North Star, for example, then no matter what choice you make or what suffering you endure, it's worth it. Meaning, like, you will go through it. It may be extremely painful, but if it's for growth, if it's for that holistic persona you have to discover that, I'd argue it is always worth it. And that's your authentic voice. That's your signature pattern, right? So I
Yeah.
think that's a journey of loneliness and bravery sometimes. And it's not like glamorous, like, yes, this has been perfect the whole way. Yes, I'm fucking killing it all the time. Like, it's just awkward as shit sometimes. Like, and no one's
Yeah.
like there, like supporting you all the time. Like, yes, this is exactly what you should be doing. You're just like, it's me and me, bro. You know what I mean? Like, So
Yeah,
anyway.
and that's such a, and obviously these are all things that I speak about a lot, right? Understanding that everything is happening for me and not to me. Like I love that saying,
Mhm.
and feeling more pain now to enjoy it later, right? Like I feel like you said, suffering is inevitable. I loved how you said that, because you're either going to choose a ton of suffering right now to reap the rewards, or you're going to have long suffering where you might be able to enjoy every single weekend, but when you're old and retired and can't move, you're going to go, why the hell did I do that to myself, right? Like that's the suffering that I want to avoid for the rest of my life. Like I want to know that I've done every single thing that I possibly can to live in my purpose.
Mhm.
Now again, that's an evolution, so I wanted to follow this up with, is there an end to this search of like, who am I? Or are we constantly growing, constantly evolving, and we're constantly doing the work?
Yeah, and that's a really important question because I think it's easy to fall into nihilism where people are self-defeatist, like, okay, like if I can't figure out my purpose, or if my purpose is just to experience this life, then what the fuck is the point? Part of my French. Like, okay, so like can I just do whatever I want? Is it self-serving? Like, is it ego-based? Can I just like indulge in all these treasures that the world has and then die and pass away and no one cares? And without kind of getting too far into like a hyper depth of the belief system, to put it metaphysically, because I can relate it to science, I can relate it to spirituality, I can relate it to just evolution of yourself. I believe that we are all part of this bigger piece of this moving cycle. So imagine you can coexist in two spaces, where you are right now in your form, and then in almost like the highest form of knowing everything and being everything, where you're still this version of you. And it could be aligned to all the things that we experience in a consciousness wave. So imagine both of those are operating at the same time, but they're so disparate that a lot of people can't even understand what that means or how to connect to it. But imagine they're moving towards each other in a like cycle, closer and closer in these pinpoints where you can actually feel them at the same time. And
Mm.
I think that's what we are all trying to do. We're trying to figure out the mechanism or the experience to get us back to this higher ascension of like love, truth, and just like what everything is. And it's hard to comprehend in a framework where we're almost like an actor in a play experiencing thing one frame at a time. You're sitting there like, I see with my eyes, I hear with this, I have these five senses, and this is what I believe to be true. And it's like, until you close your eyes, remove your smell, remove all your five senses, what's left? What's left? It's just this voice inside you moving and
Mm.
talking, that's thinking, and it's something down here that's emoting something. So these things outside our peripheral have this capacity to give us the idea of what this true reality is, and without getting too, again, abstract, there's something that's so core to that, but we've become so far removed from it that I think we're trying to get back to that. And people use
Yeah.
different things. Some people meditate, some people go on these retreats, some people pursue what they think is their true purpose by serving others. So there's a lot of ways to, I think, realign to it. But I think we're trying to feel what that feels. Because when you feel it and when you have that frequency, I believe, and I've experienced this, that there's no time anymore. Meaning like you don't die and you don't go away. You're still here, you're still present, your vibration, your signature, your but what does that mean? Who are
Yeah.
you? Are you limitless? Are you limit? And it's like, damn, like you start going down this rabbit hole and it's like, okay, cool, but like what does that mean to me today? So we can kind of backtrack, and I don't want to rant, but you know what I mean?
No,
Like,
dude, I love it. And obviously we like going deep on the show and really having these conversations that kind of open your thought patterns, because as I went down the spiritual journey, which I consider one of the four pillars of life, which is spirituality, all these things came up that tested everything I ever knew, thought, wanted to think, and the understanding of, we are energy, right? And so I always kind of break spirituality down real simply for people, because I think it's an off-putting word for so many people. They go, oh, spirituality, or they immediately think of religion, or they immediately think of one sole thing that they've been told their whole life. I look at spirituality as two potential things, right? Number one, you have to believe in something greater than you, right? Like you didn't create all of this. There's something greater than you. I don't care what you call it, whether you call it source, Allah, God, energy, whatever, like whatever you call it, there's something greater than you. Number two, we have to believe that we are all energy, which means we're constantly in motion. And our goal in this life is to get the energy to flow with us instead of against us. Right. And submitting to that day to day that we were talking about earlier, or submitting to the easy route in life, that's you actually going against the energy and the flow that you're supposed to be in, right? Like, is this similar to the experiences that you've looked into? Because this was a switch for you, man. Like, I saw your social media turn overnight, and I want to hear this story as well. Like, you went from talking about watches and cars and money to talking about some of the deepest spiritual things almost overnight. Like, how did this happen for you? When did the for lack of a better term, the awakening happen for you when you began to really kind of understand it? Because you understand this shit on a super deep level.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I think what's really been hyper aggressive, it was like very unnerving at first, but the more I sought answers to it, not to necessarily reduce or rationalize it, because I think a lot of us have our own miraculous experiences, and if we're used to thinking with our left brain and in our human form, we're always trying to rationalize that down to something that we can comprehend. And a lot of times it's not in a capacity we can comprehend all at once. It can unlock and unveil itself over time. And then we're like, oh my God, like the amount of work that had to go into creating this grander plan is so insane that like I couldn't have figured it all out in this capacity right now. And so I think I was being pulled towards it, but there's something in, and again, I don't know if people believe in astrology, but I believe in astrology from a scientific standpoint, not from like, what's my horoscope today? But there's very
You will find
ancient,
love today.
well, there's a lot of ancient science that goes into understanding how people's lives will transform based on when they were born, how they were born, and how certain energetic influences impact their life. And when I retroactively look back, and I'll tell you about the actual experience, what happened was there was something that was going to transition very aggressively, and a lot of my life comes in sudden bursts. Some people's it's gradual, where it was basically going to just like open all the chakras and something crazy was going to happen. And the abstract ability to communicate and dominate like a communication form, I think, is very powerful as a gift for me. Like you're dominated by Mercury, you're September, like you have that ability to communicate, which is probably why you're in this form of podcast.
I'm actually, so real quick, I'm actually August.
Oh, well, is it late August though?
It's late August.
Yeah, there you go.
But here's the crazy. I'm a triple Virgo.
Oh, damn. It's
yeah,
like
dude.
Analytical as shit.
Yeah. So like, it's so funny. Like I didn't believe this astrology shit until this is not a joke. I was way too many beers deep at Podfest, sitting in a van Uber with somebody who her name's Danielle Mercurio. She's been on the show. She spoke at my first event. And she's like, tell me, when you were born, where you were born, and all the things you do to figure that stuff out. And she's like, this is who you are. And like, she literally broke down, and I felt so seen, like not in a good way. And I was like, oh, damn. So yes, what you're talking about is so true.
Right. So not like, again, the frou-frou bastardized version of this has been, again, reduced so aggressively to Western culture to make us feel like there's just these fruit things that happen. Like, oh, today's going to be nice. No, there is ancient occult science that has gone into understanding these patterns. It's all patterns. It's all geometry. It's number. So when you see that, you're just kind of honoring the fact that through observation, a lot of this shit is true. And there was this unlocking where it got to a point where I was kind of pursuing the expansion of my awareness through a societal-based mechanism, luxury watches, teaching, very fast. And through my own suffering, I mean, I went through a divorce with my wife. I had a fallout a little bit with my business partner. I met a new significant other who's like a twin flame. I had a child. Like, so much happened from between 2020 to 2022. And again, moments of great uncertainty and suffering and shattering usually bring in these kind of times of reconnecting with our greater self. And I do believe we have a higher self, where the most esoteric shit happened to me that it felt like, I describe it in the book, Initiate Awareness to Manifestation. It felt like I had had an electric shock, like struck by lightning in my entire body, woke up the next day and felt like I was hungover for 2 days. I looked in the mirror, could not identify myself. My wife cried because she said, I don't recognize who you are, and lost me that day. Like the total definition of what they talk about in the resurrection of alchemy, which is like the killing of your ego and becoming this other version of self. And when that happened over time, it was like these sacred symbols were just coming into my peripheral from the collective consciousness. And I was like, okay, I don't know what the fuck this is, but like they're just being drawn on the shower. And I'm like going to mediums that I trust to kind of make sense of some of this stuff. And they're saying the same thing. long story short, I think there's a lot coming out as a channel now for me where I just need to kind of share this to help others awaken to their own limitless self. And it seems very overnight, which I appreciate you saying, because a lot of times the logical way would be like, okay, well, let's make sure we do this for 10 years, and then I'll talk a little bit about it, and people will go, oh, I see the natural transition. Things don't have to make sense to other people until they're too late and you're already there. Meaning, like, people will never understand your journey or my journey sometimes at the capacity you need to go through it. But as long as you're pursuing the intent, and yeah, it may be rocky and maybe there's going to be some weird transitions, it's always going to play out the way it was supposed to anyway, and eventually it's going to work. So you just have to have faith and just go with it and be like, yeah, I know it seems like an aggressive switch, but I'm the only one who has the answer, not you. It doesn't need to make sense to everyone. You see what I'm saying? But that's hard to do. So anyway.
That is hard to do. I think it is very hard to not worry about what other people say, think, and do. Right. And now when you go on a spiritual journey, it becomes easier because you realize that there's so much more to this lifetime for us than what other people think and how other people judge. Right. Like I talk about even from a small step in this. It's like when I started my podcast, I had a co-host. Why did I have a co-host? Because I was worried about what people would think and say and do. So if I was being judged along with my friend, then it doesn't matter. Right. But it wasn't until I went on my own, where I was supposed to be originally, did the show take off? Did I, make the impact I wanted to make? Did I get the success in business that I wanted to have? And then I was figuring out how to do the work to become a better me. And that's really what, at the end of the day, what this is all about, in my opinion, right? We can talk about impact. And I say all the time, like, you should want to help others. But that's not what this journey is always about. A lot of the times it's trying to figure out what it is for us that we need, right? Like when you had that awakening, how much fear were you flooded with? Was there fear?
At first, there was a lot of fear because it was just a very dramatic experience. But I think what's been the hardest and what will always be the hardest, and I think a reason why it's wonderful to have people like you and me and others now kind of being more open to this, especially men, because men have a different alignment to this than women. Women are very open about certain conversations when it comes to, whether it's like occult or esoteric or spirituality or whatever they believe. But with men, it's kind of like, what are you talking about? Like we just do this. We're like this, like we're rigid. So, but I think there's a lot in there for men. So what's been the hardest is it's like you went through something that was so crazy, like an experience that was like 20x puberty and like suffering, and like you've had this miraculous thing happen to you, and you can't share it with anyone because you either are crazy or they're just, even if they care and they really do try to understand, they're still never going to viscerally feel it yet. And so eventually you find a couple of very close friends who you can kind of continue to feel this out with, and then they eventually experience it. But it's just like the thing you want the most is for someone to just be there to be like, I so understand, and like this is exactly what's happening, and don't worry. And the only person who I believe can do that is your higher self. When you connect with that person who's going, you have to follow this piece of you that is telling you you're going this place, and you know what's going to happen, and no one fucking else will be able to tell or is going to support it or are going to understand. It doesn't mean they're going to be in the way all the time or bastardize it. It just means they're just not going to be like, they just will not understand until it's like the time where all of a sudden you're like the next Tony Robbins or some shit, and people are like, oh, this is epic thing that he's built or he's developed. And you're like, well, yeah, but you didn't see the 25 years of just like how lonely it was, and how like the time when one person was like, hey, this is a great podcast, or like, hey, I'm with you all the way, and it means the world to me, So
yeah,
it's just, I think that's been the hardest part. And I think if we kind of make this more aware, hopefully people will start, I think it's happening, coming out and just being like, dude, thank you for saying something, because I felt like I was a psycho, or like, and it is like, I have guys who are talking to me now more who are like, dude, I don't know how you were able to kind of see where I'm at. Like to you said, be seen, that woman did to you. But it's like, thank you, because I just couldn't make sense of it, or I felt like I was kind of repressing it. So I don't know. That's kind of,
yeah, dude. And I think it's true. I haven't had a conversation like this on the podcast with another guy before. I've had spiritual conversations. I mean, Gabby Bernstein's been on the show twice, and we go deep on certain things, but but this is the first time I'm having it with another male. And so I think it's important for people to understand that like humans are humans, right? So like we're all going to experience this. We have to be open to it. And guys are very, very shut off. And this is why you started your podcast in a sense. Talk a little bit about that and what has made you decide to essentially, this is like the going public of this journey for you, right? Like that's a big step.
Yeah, appreciate it. So it's called the Maverick Activation Initiative. And again, I think some of that was channeled and it kind of made sense after the fact. But I like the word maverick. It kind of represents our mindset, which is the lone horse, the one that needs to do what it needs to do, that is powerful, but has this kind of like, unorthodox way of things. That's just kind of like looked at by the herd, as I call it, as like, oh, that's risky, or oh, that's dangerous, or I don't get that crazy maverick. And I think there's a lot of that within men, like this kind of spiritual warrior form that is being called to action. And I think it's been repressed so long, and I think it's just been abused, and there's been a lot of trauma, and that comes with therapy and mental, conditioning, which is starting to help people realize that to be a powerful masculine energy, and I like to use masculine energy instead of just you're a man or a woman in the physical form, masculine energy, because when you can marry the feminine power energy with your masculine energy, you become this complete, insanely rock steady being that is more spiritual, but doesn't neglect or escape what your responsibility is here and how to help people, right?
Yeah.
Because people, I think, they think it's like, as a man, you're like, no, I just have to be like physical form, workout, everything's through the physical being. But that's only one layer and dimension of us. Versus like women are actually usually much more open to the other side, where they're right brain and they're very creative and they're like, no, I feel these things. I connect through my intuition. But then in the physical sense, they're like, okay, like I feel like I'm this little bird. And I think people are getting confused now, and they think that it's supposed to be recrossed through these kind of things like, oh, if I'm a man and I'm sensitive, I'm going to go way hard that way and just be like, not be able to deal with my shit. And I'm going to cry all the time and be like a snowflake. And with women, they're working out 20 times as much, seemingly. They're trying to get like super, like insanely buff, because I think they're trying to replace sometimes this void of this energy, where it's like, if you balance your energies and you connect with other people who have mature feminine energy, mature masculine energy, then you realize that there's no reason to do a lot of this kind of toxic stuff. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
men, you can talk about your emotions, and it's probably going to make you more of a masculine energy if you actually do it, instead of being this little boy repressed energy that's like, well, I can't do that shit, so I'm going to go fucking, overcharge this, go to the strip club and let my energy out that way, or freaking, do whatever you got to do to like explode, instead of just really becoming mature and kind of whole. The word you use is perfect, whole. And I don't think you can do that if you don't open up to the bigger piece of what you're trying to pursue, not just you, like one dimensional. Hey, I'm Cal. This is my society name. This is all I have. No. So.
Yeah, dude. And I'm so glad you brought that up. And I feel like we could have a whole another episode on that topic in itself, because there's so much talk about that right now, right? Talking about the toxicity of masculinity, and now men are becoming too effeminate and women are becoming too masculine, and all these things in between. And I think, number one, I think it's not true, right? Like I think that the outliers always will always shine.
Right.
I think there's bigger extremes, but there's not more of it, if that makes sense.
Right.
But the idea that a lot of these men who become toxic are the ones who are afraid of their emotions. So the ones who are afraid of maybe the signs they're getting from the universe, right? So they retreat into the idea that every Sunday, all I'm going to do is watch football and escape and party with the buddies and do these, like, that's them escaping the idea that they're being drawn into that higher calling. That's at least my own thought process behind the toxic side of masculinity, is like, it's the people trying to avoid whatever it is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm 100% agreeing with you. I think it's huge. And also the fact that like, if there was a community or a group, like, and that's what I think this movement, to just open up to people and be like, this is important and you are part of this, but you're a man, like you're a real man, like you're taking responsibility for your family and your kids and your wife, and you're treating them with respect. And yes, you can have amazing sex and do all these things that are still important, but you're not repressing the side of you that's going, there's a lot of me that's hurting deeply from shit that I grew up with, that I've never been able to vent about, that I've never been able to talk about, that I've been kind of looked at like, if I talk about that with my football buddies, that's game over. Like they're gonna look at me like, what the fuck are you, what do you know what I mean? Like this kind of like you're less because you bring stuff up that makes me feel awkward. And that is the only, I think, path to growth where you can be more whole. And I think Carl Jung wrote a great book on it. I'll send it to you later, but it's basically like, to summarize it, he said the destruction of the mature masculine energy comes down to three things predominantly in our society today, which is the lack of official ritual of becoming a man. So we don't have a sacred ritual anymore. Like back in the ancient times, it was like, you're a boy until a certain age, you see how the tribe operates, and then you're sent out into the woods in a spiritual transformation where you have to survive, bring back food, connect with nature for a weekend, and you're like, you come back and you're like, I'm a man now.
Yeah.
It's been bastardized.
I saw some shit. I saw some shit out there.
Well, yeah, and you're like, look, like I have to honor this responsibility to grow into a mature masculine energy and take my place in the circle of the tribe, instead of it being like, oh, we're just going to throw our kids out into the fucking world. And like, hey, college is kind of like that. That's not an official sacred ritual. Being in a fraternity isn't a sacred ritual. Being in a gang is like a bastardized version of taking kids and doing that. So there's no sacred transformation. And it's just like, hey, dude, good luck. You're a man now. Figure it out. Maybe you're not. Maybe you're still a boy. You don't even know. You're just kind of like going out there and looking up to people like Donald Trump and these guys who are also boy energies, who are positioned as leaders in mature masculine energy positions. And you're like, is that what a man is? So there's that. There's the lack of fathers in the family system now. So a lot of fathers leaving families, single moms, that kind of thing. So children grow up, they're like, I didn't grow up with a father figure. And then the third is this radical feminism. So not feminism in the capacity where I think it's valuable, like women deserving equal respect. No. I mean, like these extreme leftist types who are like, men are evil. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, that makes no sense. And it's just like turning like women, I think, some of them into like, am I supposed to feel this way? Have I been over? Like, no, think for yourself. Like a lot of this is coming from not even those people saying it. Like they've just been like, oh, I'm programmed to feel this because I had a bad experience. And now I feel like that's the right thing to do. And it's just hurting the fact that I think mature masculine energy should respect the equal side. And we need it more than ever. But so
dude, that's so true. And I'm glad you shared that for sure. And it's the extremists that are alarming people versus like take a step back and see what's actually happening. Right. And it's funny, we talk about how it seemed like overnight you had this drastic change, but you mentioned the time frame of 2020 to 2022. You were living in Florida, bro, but I don't know if you know what was happening in the rest of the country. Those 2 years did seem like it was like overnight, like
I know.
it disappeared. But I want to ask you a question that I ask every single person on the show. It's a two-part question. The first part is, what is your definition of success? The second part is, what are three things you do every single day to ensure that success for yourself?
Oh, that's a great question. So my definition of success has transformed over the years. And I think the way I define it now is being extremely aligned to who I am and my authentic signature, and finding a way to exercise mastery over that. Because your authentic self is a beautiful figure, a beautiful form. And I think we're all hopefully trying to pursue that version of ourselves. But I think there's also something to be said about the mastery of overcoming and kind of embracing the shadow and the light of us. And life isn't perfect, but we can kind of learn to control certain things instead of just kind of like everything's haphazard and la da da da. It's like, no, like identify and really reflect on the things that are driving you to do these subconscious patterns. Like, repressing your energy and drinking all the time or doing this. Doesn't mean it's bad or good. It just means what is really going on and can I master this? So that's how I define success now. It's not even through like the things, how many people I impact, because I would love to impact as many people as possible. But I feel like whenever I've put numbers on things and kind of come up with this like material, this is what I want, it'll always change. And eventually it maybe ends up being like that anyway. But if I get hung up on the result piece of it, I'm like, I'm not focusing on the most important piece. And then the three things I do every day to continue to pursue that. And this is good because this is helping me kind of probably refocus on doing this daily, because that's where execution happens. I would have to say is I try to do at least one thing a day minimum that is aligned to what I really feel I'm destined to do, even if there's things that I still need to take care of. Like, yeah, I gotta call and make a doctor's appointment, pay the bills, and fucking do sales calls. It's part of the thing. But I'm still gonna go meditate. I'm still going to do a podcast today. I'm still going to connect and read this part of the book that's about energy healing. So that's one. The other is being grateful. And, I think I've gone through phases where I've been more grateful and then just forgotten. And like, I just don't do it anymore. Through the transformation and the suffering, all I can do now, and it's almost like, I think it's like a surrender to grace, is to just go, and it's not religious. It just is, I'm just grateful. Like I wake up and I go, I'm fucking just grateful I can have a house, that I can talk to you today, Justin, that I can just do this and I have a voice and I'm not hurting like all the time. Like it's just kind of let me go like, look, I'm surrendering. Like I love this. I don't know what's promised. I want the world. Don't get me wrong, but I'm surrendering. So that's number two. And then number three is I try to at least, and this has been more hard, but I want to slow down to do this. Try to honor giving to someone or serving others once a day too. Meaning like, doesn't have to be grandiose. Doesn't have to be like, oh, like I had these 3 free calls where I told people and changed their life forever. It can just be like, did I do something that is not just for me? That it's like, okay, look, I can give you one 30-minute call, or can I just get someone a coffee that really, I don't know. It just has to be something like that.
Yeah.
Dude, so that's it.
But I love it. So I wrap up every single interview with the same question, but before we get there, how do people get a hold of you? How do they get your book? How do they listen to the podcast? What's all the good stuff?
Yeah, thanks for that. So they can subscribe to the podcast through all of the different platforms. It's Maverick Activation Initiative with Calvin Knight. That's me. You can connect with me at maverickactivation.com if you want to get the links to the Manifest Meaning Map, which is like the ebook, short truncated version of Finding Purpose, the Initiate Awareness to Manifestation book, which is on Amazon.com. It's I Am Initiate Awareness to Manifestation. You can buy paperback or ebook, but I suggest paperback so you can write in it. You can actually do the exercises. And then you can follow me on Instagram. Right now it's at Golden Boy Creates, or I created a new account, Maverick Activation, which will start producing content, but it is a fledgling stage thing. So
sweet, man. Dude. Yeah. Like I said, I wrap up every single interview with the same question. Since the show is called The Growth Now Movement, that question is, in your life, what has been your biggest moment of growth?
Wow, man. That's a profound question. I have listened to your podcast, and I remember you asked this at the end of every one. The biggest moment of growth has been learning to release myself from judgment and love myself unconditionally, which is very hard for someone who's self-motivated and very driven, and also very hard for someone who sees the potential of other humans and wants them to be better, but has to realize that love comes from meeting them exactly where they are. And that's been really hard for me, like really hard. And I realized the more I release judgment from myself and try to love myself unconditionally, the more I do it for other people. So I don't know. That's still the journey right now. I think that's a really profound way to grow. And I think that's where I need still more improvement. So.
Dude, that's a beautiful way to put it too, because I'm very much like you when it comes to, being driven and self-motivated and all those things. And so it is really hard to let yourself breathe, to let yourself be who you are right now. And then even more importantly, love yourself in that moment. So that's such a huge thing that I think so many people battle with still. I envy the people who truly just love themselves 24/7 without the judgment. I wonder if it's actually truly out there. That's the real follow-up question.
And but you said it great, because it's like the Western culture pushes people into this mentality that if you're not doing something, you're not valuable. Like you just need to wake up and create the world that you dominate. Otherwise you're a piece of shit. So it's programmed. And then there's a party that's like, well, am I being authentic and loving myself, or am I just being lazy? So, you know what I mean? Yeah. You're like, sit there and you go, okay, so let's find this balance and let's love myself, but let's also kind of wake up and do something today. You know what I mean?
No, dude, for sure. I love it, man. Dude, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your words of wisdom with my audience. And even more importantly, stepping into your higher self and putting content out there and sharing in such a vulnerable way the questions that have come up in your own life for your audience to really begin to think about. I love how you're doing it. I think that it's super powerful. Guys, make sure you check out his podcast, check him out on social, all that good stuff. And if you want some cool watches, he does that too. That is still part of it. Look at his Instagram story. They're all watches that are huge, and expensive and beautiful, and he found a way for you to get them affordably. But dude, thank you so much for again coming on and sharing all this.
Yeah, buddy, I appreciate you so much. I'm grateful for you and the movement you've created, and I'm so excited to be a part of your journey too. And I know that it's going to continue to expand. So thank you very much, and I'm sure it won't be the last time we're connecting over this kind of thing. So
Sounds good.